In a quiet exchange that lasted less than a minute, an American man slid an offer across a table and asked for something no ordinary journalist should ever need. $10,000 offered in cash for information that belonged to the United States government. The man on the other side said yes, smiled, and walked away. Within hours, that conversation was already sitting on a desk at the FBI. The man doing the offering had no idea. He believed he was building something of his own, finally running an operation instead of just feeding one. He was wrong in ways federal investigators would take years to fully explain, and the public would not learn the full truth until 2026, when the story of who Thomas Pauken II really was finally came apart inside a Virginia courtroom. For 7 years, Pauken had presented himself to the world as something specific, an American voice explaining China to the West, a journalist who understood Beijing better than the people covering it from Washington. That reputation was real. It was also, prosecutors would later say, the exact thing that made him useful to someone else. Thomas Pauken II grew up inside American political life, not outside it. His family had ties to Republican politics reaching back decades, the kind of background that should have made him a defender of the system, not a liability to it. Instead, in the early 2000s, he moved to Beijing and built a career as an independent commentator, publishing essays and giving interviews, positioning himself as a bridge between two countries that increasingly saw each other as adversaries. By 2017, that bridge had a toll. According to the unsealed FBI affidavit that would later expose him, Pauken was introduced that year to a woman identified in court records only as Kathy, a contact he met through connections tied to one of Xi Jinping's own speechwriters. She did not present herself as an intelligence officer. She didn't need to. What she offered him was simple: continued access, continued relevance, continued proof that his boss still mattered in Beijing. What does it mean to spend 7 years telling yourself you are simply explaining one country to another, while quietly becoming exactly the kind of asset both governments train people to become? What she asked for in return started small: reports, observations, the kind of political color commentary any journalist collects, except this journalist was passing it directly to an officer of China's Ministry of State Security. Prosecutors say the arrangement continued from at least 2019 through February of 2026, nearly 7 years, without Pauken ever registering as a foreign agent or telling a single American official what he had become. By the final years of that arrangement, Pauken wasn't only collecting information anymore, he was recruiting. Court documents describe him attempting to bring a US official into his own network, offering that person $10,000 for information Beijing wanted and could not get through official channels. He believed he had found a willing partner, but the man he was recruiting had already made a phone call. To understand why that call mattered so much, you have to understand what Pauken represented to Beijing in the first place. He wasn't a trained spy. He wasn't handled the way career case officers train assets, with tradecraft and dead drops, and the careful compartmentalization Cold War defectors describe in memoirs decades later. He was something quieter, and in some ways more useful. An ordinary American with real credibility, embedded in a country the US government struggles to see clearly, who wanted more than anything to matter. That is the pattern intelligence officials have been warning about publicly through 2026. Not the return of the Cold War mole-hunting Moscow trained for decades, but a newer, more diffuse strategy. Recruiting analysts, commentators and professionals who already have legitimate access, and asking them for small things repeatedly, until small things add up to something the law calls espionage. FBI Assistant Director Roman Rojavsky, who oversees the Bureau's counterintelligence division, has said publicly that this is now one of the most active fronts in American law enforcement. In the same months Pauken sat in that Virginia courtroom, federal prosecutors were unsealing charges against a Federal Reserve-linked economist accused of the same quiet cooperation with Beijing, and against active duty American soldiers who had allegedly done the same thing in uniform. This was not one isolated betrayal. It was a pattern investigators were tracking in real time. Across institutions, Americans assume are sealed off from foreign influence: the military, the financial system, the press. Pauken's case was simply the thread that happened to surface first. The relationship with Kathy had shifted too. Investigators say it moved over time from simple reporting to direct tasking, with Kathy requesting specific information, specific introductions, specific angles on people Pauken had access to inside Washington's orbit through his journalism. He was not being asked what he thought in him. He was being told what to look for. What Pauken didn't know, Kathy was never the only one watching. By 2025, Pauken had convinced himself he could operate the way his handlers did: recruit his own source, run his own asset, prove his usefulness in a new and more active way. He approached a US official he believed could be persuaded, offering money for information the Chinese government wanted and had been unable to obtain through any legitimate channel. In his own mind, this was the moment he stopped being a source and became something closer to an operator. He did not know that the FBI already had a file with his name on it. What Pauken never understood, what the affidavit only makes clear in hindsight, is that the official he tried to recruit was never an easy mark. That person was already cooperating with federal investigators, reporting every conversation, every offer, every dollar amount, back to agents who had likely been building a case around Pauken for far longer than he ever suspected. This is the moment the entire story reverses. Pauken believed he was the one running an operation. In reality, he had walked directly into one. Here is the detail that changes how the whole 7 years reads. Federal counterintelligence cases of this scale rarely end in a fast takedown. They typically involve years of quiet observation before an arrest is ever made public, which means it is entirely possible Pauken had already been identified and allowed to keep operating long before that $10,000 offer ever crossed the table. Not because the FBI missed him, because letting the relationship continue told them more about the wider network than an early arrest ever could. The timing was not a coincidence. It never is. If that is true, then Thomas Pauken II was never the clever operator he believed himself to be in those final months. He may have been something else entirely, a known watched asset, useful to federal investigators for the exact same reason he had been useful to Beijing, because he did not know he was being used. How many of those private conversations were ever truly private? In February 2026, prosecutors made their case public. Pauken was charged with acting as an unregistered agent of the People's Republic of China. He pleaded guilty. The 7 years of quiet reporting, the recruitment attempt, the money offered across that table, all of it became part of a federal record that will follow him for the rest of his life, with sentencing scheduled for September of 2026 and a maximum penalty of 10 years in federal prison. The real question was never who Pauken worked for. It was who else is still out there, doing exactly what he did, without ever calling it espionage in their own mind. Pauken was not a trained intelligence officer. He never carried a badge or a code name of his own. He was a writer who wanted to matter, in a country that understood exactly how to make people like him feel that they did, and that, according to federal investigators, is precisely the profile Beijing has learned to cultivate. Not the dramatic double agent of old spy fiction, but the ordinary professional who slides, one small favor at a time, into something he never planned to become. Kathy has never been publicly identified. No photograph, no full name, no confirmation of where she is now, or whether she is even still operating under that name. She exists in the official record only as a designation, a placeholder for a person the US government has not yet, or will not yet, name. Whatever she knows about how many other Americans she or people like her have approached over the same kind of years has never been made public. Thomas Pauken II will be sentenced in the fall of 2026. The case against him is closed. The question his case opened is not. Somewhere, right now, another conversation just like his continues.